because that's a way for you to start to evaluate. And what I'm always sharing here with you, evaluate where you are. What are you doing now? How can you do it differently? Where are they? Are they on track? Are they a little bit behind, a little bit ahead? And what can you do to help them close those gaps when necessary? Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, but here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, so let's get started. Today, we are diving into something so fundamental, yet often overlooked: teaching your baby and toddler how to bite and chew. Believe it or not, this simple act is key to their healthy development in many, many surprising ways, from the basic eating habits to speech and language development, even their ability to self-regulate. And what does self-regulate mean? Less tantrums, less meltdowns, easier transitions. We're going to break down how biting and chewing influence your child's overall well-being and what you, mama, daddy, grandparents, can do to help them master this crucial skill. Today, I will cover 4 major areas that affect this development, and then I will highlight 10 tips that can support mastery of this crucial skill. The first major area centers around healthy eating and the immunity system. Let's look at it basically, that proper chewing actually boosts your child's immune system. And that's true for you and me as well. But now we're looking at your baby and your toddler and your preschooler. How can you set the stage for a healthier, stronger immunity? And what I like to do here is kind of set up what would be ideal. And then you, mom, dad, grandparents, you try it out. You try to implement it in real time in your life, and you tweak it and mold it to fit your lifestyle. So ideally, us humans, and again, when I talk about especially eating and chewing and all of this, it relates to your baby, toddlers and children, teenagers, and you and me. So when we take a bite of food, if we chew it 30 to 40 times before we swallow, then we're releasing gut hormones that aid in digestion and proper satiety. And satiety means that your child and older children really learn to recognize when they're full. And that is part of the interoceptive, one of the sensory perceptions that we have to help our child develop over time in these first several years. When am I hungry? When am I full? When do I have to go to the toilet? When do I feel hot or cold or thirsty or cranky or tired? All of these interoceptive, it's when we are in tune with our internal organs. And one of them is built around those early stages of biting, chewing, and eating. So this process, by chewing foods 30 to 40 times, encourages healthy eating habits and a better nutrient absorption. I mean, it does make sense, right? If we're just shoving food in our mouth, barely chewing it, and we're just gulping it down, which all of us do from time to time, right? We're in a hurry, we're eating in the car, shame on us, and I'm as guilty as all of them. We're, mindlessly eating in front of the computer. We're trying to do 3 or 4 things. Multitasking doesn't work. You and I know this. But if we break it down and say, okay, let's carve this time out for eating, as a family, or even if it's just you and your toddler, let's do it with intention. Let's do it purposefully. Let's see if we can chew 20, 30, 40 times, ideally. This process, as I said, builds a healthy eating habit and nutrient absorption, which then, what does that do? Lead into stronger immunity. That's where our immunity system is shaped and encouraged and rubbed and lubricated, so to speak, right? If we have a poor diet, if we're not eating well, then that just begins to trickle down into a lot of other human biology elements. And then we're run down, we're tired, we're bad sleepers, we're, moody, and it becomes this vicious catch-22. So teaching good chewing habits early lays that foundation for a lifetime of healthier eating patterns. And you'll see how all of these 4 major areas influence and connect to one another. And let's always be stepping back and looking at what is our goal for that 3-year-old and that 5-year-old and that 7-year-old and that 10-year-old. We start now at birth, but as we introduce solid foods at about 6 months of age, and I promote here baby-led weaning. That's another conversation, but if you haven't heard of it, just Google it. But I've talked about it a number of times here. And that is the beginning, right? When you're introducing foods for purpose, right? Other than the bottle or the breast for nutrients. Now you begin at 6 months and 8 months and 10 months to really help them build that relationship with food. So now let's look at number 2 of these 4 major areas. It helps build oral motor skills, which are the building blocks for speech. And when I talk about oral motor skills, sometimes I think we in my field forget that the jargon I am used to may not be so user-friendly, but oral just means the mouth, and motor, whenever any of us therapists or medical practitioners use the word motor, we mean muscle, right? So the muscles in the mouth that we need for speech are the same muscles in our mouth that we use and develop for chewing and eating. So we need to really help your little ones learn how to, quote unquote, work out all of those muscles. As your child begins to bite and then chew, they strengthen the muscles in their jaw, lips, and tongue. And I've mentioned here before, but we have about 100 muscles from our diaphragm up that we use for speech and eating and chewing. Now, we can zone in on 26 muscles of the mouth only. But when I talk about the jaw muscle and the lips and the tongue, these are skills that are critical not just for eating, but for clear, concise, articulate speech. Remember, they'll coo and then they'll babble, and babbling is just putting a bunch of different sounds together in different strings, but those sounds are strung together to then create words, and words are strung together to create sentences, and sentences are strung together to create conversational flow. And when we co-articulate, that means we're moving all of these 100 muscles, right? That includes the breathing, the inhalation, and the exhalation as speech is produced. But those 26 muscles in the mouth that are really moving very precisely for stringing those sounds together. And I remember in the early 1990s when I began to learn how all of this is interrelated, I studied deeply in graduate school the eating and the chewing, because I know I've shared with you guys in the past that children kind of freak me out. So I focused on adult brain rehab, right? And so if you had a stroke or a head injury and you had a swallowing disorder that's called dysphagia, I was in the hospital setting where I helped rehabilitate that process. And so it was the motor development and rehabilitation of it really made a lot of sense to me. But when I turned my focus onto the children, I thought, everything I learned about brain injury and rehabilitation applies to the innocent little baby and toddlers who are just beginning to develop these skills. It's all interconnected, the eating and the talking. Oral motor, mouth muscles, right, develop over time, and it plays a significant role on how your child forms the words and the sounds from cooing and babbling, like I mentioned, all the way through co-articulated conversational speech at 3, and then really sophisticated language at 5 and 6. But as I said, it was in the early 1990s when I really started to study speech sound development, acquisition, and how that related to oral motor skills, which the truth is we are not necessarily taught all of this muscle motor coordination kinds of stuff in graduate school. Even to this day, it's kind of limited. So if you're interested as a speech language pathologist, you have to go out and find the other therapists and the other researchers. Sometimes they're occupational therapists, but I had to find someone that would help me do a deep dive, right? And one of my first mentors, who still is probably the number one in this study area, is Sarah Johnson Rosenfeld. But she really helped begin to break down and study and provide training material as well as therapeutic tools and strategies and techniques, because the graduate programs don't cover this. And there's a big internal brouhaha and political conflict between, does oral motor skills really affect eating and chewing? And we as speech therapists need to be purist and blah, blah, blah. That's another whole ridiculous conversation. However, on that note, Sarah Johnson Rosenfeld really helped me open my eyes, as well as occupational therapists. There was this huge practice there in the LA County area called Rosemary Johnson and Associates. And they were occupational therapists that really helped me understand sensory integration and oral motor development and how all of these pieces come together. But I'm just going to share one little snapshot. For example, when your child, or you and I, again, what we're teaching our babies and our toddlers and our preschools is what you and I do when we eat and chew, right? But say food is kind of stuck between your teeth in your back molars. It could be your lower molars or your upper molars, right? But we have to pull back our tongue. We call that retraction. Pull back our tongue. I always describe it to kids as kind of a cobra snake. They pull back, they retract. And then you have to take the tip of the tongue and kind of brush it along your back molars, right? To clear off teeth. Or if you have, say celery stuck back there, or a piece of meat, or a gummy, God forbid, but anything that's stuck back there. But that motor skill to retract, and then we call it lateralization, to take the tip and move it laterally, right? It turns sideways and then to the other side. If you can do that motor pattern several times in a row, we usually counted 10, 20, 30, very similar to chewing. But if you can do that repetitively, then your tongue is mature enough, developed enough, coordinated enough to be able to say the R sound. And the R, like in rabbit, red, road. And that's one of the later developing speech sounds. It's one of the hardest to master in English. It's the trickiest because we can't really see inside our mouth. But Sarah Johnson Rosenfeld really identified how, if you can master clearing off the back molars, then that's the same motor pattern you need to master the R. And the R is the most frequently occurring sound in English language. It acts as a consonant, like in red, rock. It also acts as a vowel, like in car and butter. At the end acts like a vowel, and we can talk about the nitty-gritties of the R, but it also acts as a blend, like in THR, 3, or brown, right? So it has these multiple roles to play. It's very hard motor planning, right? To pull that tongue back and then to lateralize it side to side. But if you pause this podcast episode and just try to go back and say the R, you'll see how it is shaped like a cobra's head, and it really takes a lot of finesse to it. That's why it's one of the later and more challenging sounds for a lot of children. But I say this because if we teach our child how to really bite and chew and clear food, you can also have to sometimes clear food out of the little pocket of your mouth, right? You don't want food to get stuck back there. You want them to always be safe. You don't want them to get up from the table and still have residual food in their mouth that once they start running, they could choke on that. So you want to make sure all of these skills are in place. And it starts at 6 months. It's really honed in by 12. By 18, they're fairly independent and pretty much eating anything and everything. By 2, they should have really good eating habits, but it takes time. And you, mom, you, dad, you, grandma, are in charge. Now let's move to the third major area of these 4 that I'm outlining for you today. And that is chewing really helps build a healthy, strong facial development, as well as nasal breathing. And you're like, well, doesn't the face just kind of grow on its own? And isn't nasal breathing just natural? Yes and no. We have learned over the last 50 to 100 years, but especially in the last, I'd say, 20 to 30 years, how facial development needs to be shaped, and that we could do a deep dive about this. But I feel it's not talked about enough, especially in my field. But there are other specialists like occupational therapists, as well as orthodontics, as well as breathing specialists, because this problem has become chronic. But chewing helps shape your baby's face, literally. So when the jaw and lips and tongue develop properly through chewing and swallowing, it supports the facial structure developing in a nice, balanced, symmetrical fashion. So proper chewing habits also encourage that nasal breathing. And I have talked a lot about nasal breathing here before, and we will do a deeper dive with some specialists in the future. But it has its own host of benefits. So as I talked about the immunity, absorbing the nutrients and really starting the digestive process in your mouth through the salivary glands by chewing 20, 30, 40 times, but it also improves the energy level, it improves sleeping, and even emotional regulation. So what happens in the mouth that affects your baby's face structure and development over time is that you're honing their ability to have natural posture in the mouth. So the teeth are slightly touching, and we say in our world that you could slide a piece of paper between your back molars. So they're not clenched, but they're not open wide apart either. So the lips are touching very gently, but they're closed, right? That's telling you that they have a good seal. And they can say what we call the bilabial sounds, right? The M, ma, 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 the B, ba, 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 and the P, pa, 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 right? But they have good lip structure and strength and coordination. At rest, they close and they touch each other, the upper and lower lip, right? And then the teeth in the back, or the gums, if the molars aren't erupted yet, they're not barely touching. Again, visualize a piece of paper sliding through them. But the tongue then rests up ever so gently against the roof of the mouth. That helps with so many things in the facial development, but it also helps support getting ready to swallow your own saliva, or getting ready to take a bite and chew, and getting ready to do speech. At another time, we'll talk about the individual speech sounds, right? There are 42 sounds that we use. We use up those 26 letters in the alphabet to make those 42 sounds in order to produce English. But the key here is that teaching good chewing habits early really help build the facial structures, and then natural nasal breathing. It helps with that immunity, like I said. And if we are nasal breathers, then we're using the natural biology to filter the air, to warm the air, to increase our nitric oxide, a host of wonderful, natural, God-given elements to how we as humans should grow and breathe and learn and attend and sleep, and it's all interrelated. But I started to do a real deep dive into all of this, I'd say about 15 years ago. And there are a couple of books that if, you just want to peruse or get on audio, one of them was by a gentleman named James Nestor, Nestor, and I'll have links down below. It's called Breath. And that's looking at us as adults or your teenager if they have a lot of chronic autoimmune issues or breathing problems or sleep issues or energy problems. But he really peels back and did a deep dive into a lot of our kind of quote unquote common or acceptable issues. Oh, he's just a chronic snorer. Well, he's 4 years old. He shouldn't be a chronic snorer. Right? And then there are some other books that you might want to take a look at. One is called Jaws, and it's by Kahn and Ehrlich, Ehrlich. And a lot of these books that I have recommended to you all, to parents, to other colleagues of mine, I often take that 80-20 rule, that I really look at it and agree with 80%. There's always something that might be a little different or off, but that's how I look at this particular book, Jaws. The subtitle is The Story of the Hidden Epidemic, and it really does highlight how we've kind of, through our modern lifestyle, our changes in our industrialized food, and a lot of our lifestyle choices have impacted how we grow structurally, right? Our face, and then how we build our energy, our learning capacity, all of those kinds of things. But it's a fascinating research on really looking at how this is becoming an epidemic that we don't really talk a lot about. And then there's another book that caught my eye years and years ago because of the catchy title. It's called Shut Your Mouth and Save Your Life. But it really talks about the dangers of mouth breathing and why nose or nasal breathing is preferred. And it does its research on the Native American experience. And so that's another insight. There are actually probably dozens of books nowadays really looking at this, because sleep apnea or disrupted sleep is a quote unquote common problem across our lifespan. As I said, with babies and toddlers and school age kids, it used to just be with the elderly, and that's just not true anymore. And I think it's a lifestyle choice, but you could set the stage and help them build the structure, keep their nasal passage clear and healthy, and then really help build a strong immunity and all of these other wonderful areas, right? Speech and clarity, attention, focus, all of these things that I'm talking about today. So that was the third of these four major areas. And you can see how all of these things are interrelated. And one other note that I forgot to mention under this whole facial development structure, I think most of us know, whether you're a parent or not, that babies have this soft spot on top of the head. They actually have two, right? One's on top. They're called fontanelles. And then one's on the back of the head too. And that just means that the skull isn't completely fused because the brain is going to grow. And that leads into that myth that, 80% or 90% of your baby's quote unquote brain and intellect and all of that is done by the third birthday. It just means that your baby's head structure, the size of it, the circumference of it is 80% done. There's a whole lifetime of learning and shaping the brain and all of that. But somewhere between that second and third birthday, those fontanelles really begin to fuse. But it's mostly designed to survive the birth canal. And then it gives that pliability so the brain and the skull can grow together to about 80% of its full adult size by their third birthday. But on that note, we also have the capability of shaping the oral structure, right? The maxilla, which is your top jaw, and your mandible, which is your lower jaw. And we do that through biting and chewing and swallowing. And we swallow about 2,000 times a day. So not only just eating, right, but those swallows that we take with our own saliva, and we even swallow during the night, of course, right? Otherwise we choke on our own spit. But the idea is that every time you swallow, you put about 5 pounds of pressure on the roof of your mouth. So if you're an open mouth breather and you're pushing against your front maxilla, right, where your front teeth grow, and you're pushing forward, we call that an anterior thrust, then you're shaping and you're having that buck teeth structure, and you don't want that. You want a wide kind of lower ridge palate, which is the hard bony part of the roof of your mouth, which acts as the floor to your nasal cavity, right? So if we want healthy growth and development structurally and the immunity and all of that, then the tongue has to rest at the roof of the mouth all through the night as they continue to breathe and swallow their own saliva, shaping that nasal cavity, because the more air we take through our nasal passages, then the more open those areas become. And in the book, I referenced Breath by James Nestor. He talks a lot about adults opening that nasal passage. And maybe you have heard about mouth taping. That's very popular these days. And if you haven't, you can just Google it. But there's a wealth of information around this. But the point is, you have a baby or a toddler or maybe a preschooler that you can help turn this around, help really build these very, very important skill habits that we kind of just take for granted. And I seriously doubt any pediatrician will talk about this with you. So my job, my responsibility is to share what I've learned in the clinical practice, but also extra reading, my own life experience. And regarding all of this facial development and nasal breathing, I screwed up big time with my daughter. She's now 24, but she was turned into a major thumbsucker. And I've shared this with you before in previous episodes. And we really kind of messed up her whole palate shape, right? It became high and narrow like her thumb and crowding the teeth, and a whole issue where then she required serious orthodontics in her teens. We can, zone in on this in and of itself, but this is a big piece to setting them up, is having good posture for breathing, right? During the day, during playtime and listening time, and also sleep time. But it's also setting them up for good posture and readiness for tackling all of those individual speech sounds, and then blending those speech sounds together so then they can be clear at 3 and 4 and 5 and hold a conversation and tell a story. Okay, so now the fourth and final major area that I want to touch upon is how the brain and self-regulate work together through healthy chewing. In other words, how chewing really helps us build focus and attention. And we're all talking about that these days, right? How do you help your little toddler and preschooler, teenager, and even you and me? How do we help sustain our focus so we can complete a task or complete a reading assignment or focus and self-regulation? And what that means is really keeping your body still and your mind active to do something. And it could be practicing the piano. It could be, like I said, reading a book. It could be building a Lego set. All of those different self-regulations come from the months and the years, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months of really building that biting, chewing, and swallowing sequential pattern, because that's helping to wire the brain. And so here's something cool. Think about it this way. Chewing, as you know by now, isn't just about eating. It actually impacts the firing in the brain development. So there's a bunch of different studies, but one that always kind of jumps in my forebrain is a study from Japan showing how chewing gum, how they actually used it with children and teenagers, actually stimulates the hippocampus, which then improves memory and brain function. And so the hippocampus area is where our memory is focused. And that's why you've heard this before. We chew on our pencils or our pen. We chew nails. We chew on our clothes. We even shake our leg. All of that kind of stimulation, we're kind of pumping energy into our body to help us sustain, to help us focus, to help us weed out the background distractions or noise and then zone in on whatever we're doing. But this brain boost from chewing helps your child build, because that's what we're doing when they're babies and toddlers and preschoolers and, early elementary. We're continuing to build their attention skills, their ability to cooperate, and their self-regulation. And like I've mentioned before, self-regulation is really being able to have control over our feelings, our emotions, our body in space. So then we're not too reactive to whatever the external world is throwing at us, right? And this helps if they're playing and you say to them, okay, honey, in 2 minutes we have to clean up because then we have to go to the store. Or we have to clean up and pick up your brother. Or we have to clean up and then take a bath and go to bed. Any one of those transitions. But building this self-regulation, this ability to attend and focus, and part of that is shifting. So if they're playing nicely by themselves and you interrupt them by your voice and say, okay, honey, in 2 minutes we have to clean up. They can shift their attention to listening to you and what they're doing, process it, understand it, and then recognize, oh, all right, 2 minutes is no big a deal, right? I'll finish this little doohickey and then we'll go on. And I've had life experience enough to know that mom means 2 minutes, and tomorrow I can come back to this wonderful play activity. So they have built, even in their 18 months or 24 months or 30 months life experience, enough attention and cooperation and focus that they really get the structure of the day. And it really does wire their brain so they can process this information auditorily, visually, tactily. They're processing, taking in data, interpreting it, and then responding to it, right? So it's such a natural way that you and I can help them build their focus ability and then become more independent and more cooperative, like I said. But this is how God designed us. This is what I believe. And, good therapists and good science really validate what our intuition is in how babies learn best and grow best and develop best, and to have realistic expectations of them. Yes, they're going to have meltdowns once in a while. Yes, they're going to have to step back and relearn something. That's true, but you can easily teach a 16, 18, 20, 24-month-old how to transition through a lot of these life experiences. So chewing, and when they're little, they need a lot of chewing because they're wiring that brain. They need a lot of chewing because they're learning through their mouth, right? And so we have to expose them to that. And that's part of my 10 tips. But trust me when I say that chewing is one of the body's most natural ways to self-soothe. That's why pacifiers, chewing on the thumb or chewing on their blankie or whatever, really helps with self-soothing and regulation. And this helps them calm down. And let's back up. It's not that we want them to suck their thumb or chew on their clothes when they're 7. We build them, we give them the opportunities in those first 3 years, so then they are shaping the brain, they are making those neural connections, they are building a healthy sensory system, right? The 5 basic sensory systems: sight, vision, hearing, touch, and smell. But then we have those 3 hidden ones that I've talked about before. And one of them here, I mentioned the interoceptive, getting in touch with our internal organs. Oh, my stomach just growled. I heard it and felt it. Or, oh, my bladder is full. It's time to go to the toilet. Those internal connections. And now we're helping them build when my tummy is full and I'm satisfied, right? Or this food, this piece of steak tastes very different than this piece of celery over here, and I can differentiate. But you're building their knowledge base and literally building the neural connections. So those are the 4 major areas that really influence overall health and development and their well-being. And that's when I talk about well-being, I'm referring to their ability to focus and transition and listen and follow through and cooperate and negotiate, right? Part of that is, no, Mom, I need more than 2 minutes. I need 5 minutes to finish this, or 10 minutes. But they're able to negotiate with you through a relatively calm center of self. So now let's highlight, and I'm not going to necessarily dive deep into these, but I want you to take these home, because that's a way for you to start to evaluate. And what I'm always sharing here with you, evaluate where you are. What are you doing now? How can you do it differently? Where are they? Are they on track? Are they a little bit behind, a little bit ahead? And what can you do to help them close those gaps when necessary? So here are some things that you can start to consider as you're looking at your perhaps brand new 6-month-old or 8-month-old or 18-month-old or even 36-month-old, right? So the first is always start with oral exploration, letting your baby explore safe objects with their mouths. We all know that that's why babies put things in their mouth, right? We think about that perhaps when they're 6 months and 8 months, but we have to really do it with intention, give them safe objects as well as food, right? Different types, and we'll talk about that, so they can begin to really gather information. Right? How does this feel? Oh, it's tasteless. It's just a rattle, right? But it's bumpy, or it's hard, or it's soft, or I can bite and it responds, and bite and it responds. So they're gathering data, right? Number 2, encourage biting and chewing with a variety of textures. And we want to do this through both safe oral toys as well as food. And lots of people will start with teething biscuits. I'm not necessarily a big fan of those anymore. I used to be, and we'll talk in a future episode about, what foods to pick and how best to set the stage to healthy eating. But highly processed foods, even baby organic, is still highly processed, but you can use it once in a while or in the very, very early stages, maybe in those first 4 to 6 weeks. But also look at baby safe veggies. In the beginning, you're going to steam them or roast them to make them al dente, as well as fruits, right? You can poach a pear or poach an apple, take the skin off in the very, very beginning, but they're going to have different textures and, of course, different tastes. Number 3, lead by example. Slow down your own eating. I know this is hard to do, but I've encouraged you over and over again. It can really, really make a huge difference. Eat with them, slow down your own eating, chew visibly in front of your child so they can see the process. And I can't tell you, probably 85% of all of my clients over the years, they were stunned to learn that, I have to show them? It isn't just automatic. No, we have a bite reflex, we have a swallow reflex, and we have a gag reflex. And those reflexes are just a quick, literally knee-jerk reaction, right? They're wired in our system. If we have a good wiring system, right, we're kind of developing appropriately, whether it's that bite reflex, a half an hour after birth, or a swallow reflex when they're finally getting the hang of nursing, or a, gag reflex where they just kind of cough. And a gag is healthy, and you're going to see a lot of gagging going on. That's okay. That's very different than choking. We can talk about very specifics of how to identify the difference, right? Choking is no sound. They're turning purple and is dangerous, right? And everybody is always worried about that, rightfully so. But gagging, a little coughing, or even spitting it back up, that's God's given reflex to help keep them protected and to help practice. Oh gosh, I didn't chew that enough. Oh gosh, that was too big of a bite. Oh gosh, I have to slow down. Oh gosh, I can't talk and laugh and eat at the same time, right? So those are things that you're going to teach them in real life. Start with oral exploration. Use a variety of textures. Lead by example. Number 4, offer foods that naturally require more chewing. And this is a big one. And I've talked a lot about these ideas here in previous episodes. I had just about a year ago, October 17th and 24th, back in 2023, and it was titled Fussy Babies and Pacifiers. And I really dive deep into how to use a pacifier appropriately in those first 6, 8, 10 months. And then on October 31st of last year, 2023, I talk a lot about drooling and teething. And again, this is all about oral motor. So you can go back and listen to those episodes. But in offering foods that naturally require more chewing, an apple, right, is different than a carrot even, right? The flesh of an apple is going to be less crunchy, still going to crunch, right, than a carrot. And even different meat textures, right? A piece of fish is going to be different than a piece of steak. And so you want a lot of variety. And if they're only leaning toward a handful of foods, then you're on the road of developing a picky eater, and you want to move away from that. And I have a number of episodes about picky eating, and we'll continue to talk about that. But again, these 10 tips give you opportunity to step back and say, okay, where are we on this? And how can I modify our lifestyle to help build these skills and really create mastery? Number 5, use positive reinforcement. And what that means in this situation is that we have to share these eating and dinner practices or eating periods together, right? Celebrate their chewing with smiling and clapping and positive words and hip, hip, hooray and high five and bumping and all of those. Make it enjoyable. Make it engageable. And I can't, I started talking about this 20 years ago, how we as families, slowly but surely, have moved away from eating meals together. And what I'm saying is, if you want a healthy, strong eater by the time they're 3, even by the time they're 2, but then you have to take time to eat snacks and meals with them. You have to show them it's not just table manners. As I covered these 4 major areas, it's a plethora of critical elements to your child's health and well-being and growth and development. Plus, it's fun. Sit down, chat. Let them be in their safe high chair and you're face-to-face, eye-to-eye with them, but use a lot of positive reinforcements. And then number 6, as I mentioned, create mealtime routines where chewing is the focus. So maybe have a chewing game even. And I used to do this in therapy all the time and model through my one-way mirror in showing parents that you chew with them and you can count on your fingers. Let's go back to my first comment here in this whole episode. I want to teach them how to chew every single bite 30 to 40 times. And you're like, what? How do I do that? Show them. It will also help us as the grown-ups slow down, enjoy our meals, take in more nutrients, really appreciate the different flavors, right? All of this is just family boosting. Think of it that way, right? But you can count on your fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and do that a couple times and encourage them. Kids will follow you, I assure you. Number 7, avoid over-relying on purees as your baby grows. And again, I have stepped back from this. I used to teach a lot of purees, but I don't anymore, especially as baby-led weaning kind of exploded here in the US, maybe 10, 12 years ago. But as I became much more focused on how do we go back and help the baby transition and build these skills? Because in my private practice, I would get 3, 4, 5-year-old kids, 6-year-old kids sometimes, who couldn't chew their food. Their mastication, right? Their ability to actually take even a bite of a sandwich and chew it properly was really alarming to me. And with a lot of us who were jumping into this oral motor, feeding, and speech connection, we had to figure out how do we help parents take on this role of teaching them. And at the same time, more and more and more packaged ultra-processed foods were being introduced into our life. Oh, for the convenience. Oh, for the ease. And then the food companies got pretty clever, right? They want to make their money. Then they did gluten-free, organic, but it's still highly processed, still predominantly sugar and sweetness, and it melts in your mouth. It does not require chewing. Just take goldfish, pop a goldfish in your mouth, it will melt. And so we can talk about that as well and do a deep dive. But my point here is that when you start to introduce solid foods, you can use pureed foods in the very, very beginning, first maybe couple of weeks. And I will use natural pureed foods. Yogurt, for example, is natural. You can't eat yogurt any other way. Yes, you could mix fruit in there or nuts or whatever. I wouldn't do that with a baby or even a new eater of solid foods, because that's two different textures and it's too confusing, and they don't know how to handle it in their mouth. That's is competitive data inside their mouth. So I wouldn't do that. You would have the pureed yogurt, right? And I would use Greek yogurt because it's high protein and it's also thicker. And then you would have fruit on the side in the beginning. But really, and I know a lot of parents, and I've talked before, and we'll go there, we'll continue to revisit this. Don't be afraid of gagging. Gagging is okay. It's the natural God-given reflex to protect them, right? And so if you're sitting down with them, if you're sharing this meal with them, if you're modeling and showing them how to do it, they will follow you. And the less likely they are to gag, let alone choke. So we want to give them a lot of opportunities to work that jaw muscle, right? That up and down. In the beginning, it's just going to be an up and down biting. And then over time, and we can talk about this later, there's what we call the rotary grind, where we kind of rotate the jaw laterally from side to side just enough to really what we call mastication, right? Really chew that food down. And when we, count 30, 40 times, then they have a lot of opportunity, a lot of repetition. It's like, if you're lifting that barbell and you can lift a really, really heavy barbell for 3 to 6 reps, that's going to build bulk and power, right? That's a different kind of workout than if you're really trying to wire your brain to communicate to your muscle to move. And it's some therapists and some athletic trainers will look at that as priming. So you're going to do it 15 or 20 times in a really light weight, right? And that's what you're doing when you're showing them how to chew 30 or 40 times. And then number 8, give them time. Chewing is a skill that gets refined over time. Like I said, we're introducing soft foods, chewable foods, tasty foods at 6 months. And then it's not until their second birthday where they're really pretty competent chewers and can eat a wide variety of foods. Now, it might be earlier than that. It depends on how much time you devote. But on the scheme of milestones and mastery, right? Full mastery is when 90% of the kids are competent. So be patient and be consistent. Look at carrots. You can start with, like I said, steamed carrots. Al dente, though. Don't make them smushy, right? But, the carrot texture and density is different than celery, right? Even when you go to bite into it and they're both raw, there's still a different texture and density to a carrot and a celery, which is different than cucumbers, which is different than a steak or crispy bacon or that sweet potato, right? It doesn't have to be pureed where you put cream and blend it all up, but it could be a chunk of a sweet potato, which requires some chewing, right? And then that's different than, say, a roasted pear or a grilled pineapple. So a lot of different flavors, a lot of different textures. All of them required some kind of chewing. So, and that really leads into number 9, which is trying to offer foods that require different types of chewing, right? So think of that as a stronger bite or a little less effort. And just as your child builds what we call gradation, right? Grading, going from step to step and making things smoother and automaticity. That gradation of grabbing something, a cup for drinking. It's not jerking. It's not all or nothing. That they have that internal part of the interoceptive system that, oh, this carrot is cooked. It's different than when it was raw. I can adjust. Or, gosh, this bacon is pretty chewy. I better chew 10 extra times. It's this kind of internal dialogue that your cells are talking to each other that you can adjust in nanoseconds. And then number 10, the tip or trick is to encourage plenty. And I talk about this all the time, but this is how this is all wrapped up and put on a bow. Encourage plenty of face-to-face interactions. And like I said, even playful biting and chewing games, right? Counting your number of chews, or biting down on a carrot and taking a deeper bite with it, right? And really, popping, but making it playful in the beginning. And then over time, the manners will come, but the manners can't come. You want them to like a variety of foods. You want them to enjoy and eat in a reasonable time. You want them to sit there for 20 minutes and share a meal with the whole family. In order to get there to those table manners, to chew with your lips closed, you have to give them these 10 opportunities, right? And so you're building that jaw, you're building the lip closure. The muscle's called an orbicularis oris. It circles around your mouth so you can round your lips for the ooh sound. And then you can close your lips for the what we call bilabials, right? Ba 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 pa 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 pa. Right? But you also want to be able to sustain that lip closure and then the tongue at rest softly on the hard palate so you can breathe through your nose while you're eating. And again, kids who have chronic nasal congestion are often picky eaters because they can't breathe through their nose while they're chewing. And then they chew with their mouth open and it becomes messy and it becomes exhausting. And anytime you and I've ever had, say, a head cold or a sinus infection, eating is exhausting. Because we're not getting oxygen, we're not getting nitric oxide by breathing through our nose because we can't chew with our mouth closed. So again, I'm helping you connect the dots and interrelate these kinds of things. As a conclusion, I want to ask each and every one of you, mom, dad, grandparents, please do not underestimate the power of teaching your little ones how to bite and chew. And then, of course, how to swallow. But it's a win-win. Not only are you building healthy eating habits, which we talk a lot about here, and boosting their immune system, which go hand in hand, but you're also supporting speech and articulation skills, proper facial growth and development, and self-regulation. It's all interwoven. These skills don't come overnight. Please be patient with yourself and with them, but consistent opportunities with yourself and your little ones really can hone them over time. But you do have to demonstrate. You do have to show. You have to lead. That's what you are. I believe in God, our Holy Father, and that He has given us these little precious babies as gifts, and we're to steward them. We're to guide them through this process of growing and learning. Through demonstration, through some social reinforcement, and absolutely sharing family time together with meals, you can set this foundation. You can really get them going, but you might be looking at yourself and going, oh dear, he's 18 months, or oh dear, she's 30 months. I haven't done a lot of this stuff. She's a picky eater. He's messy, all of this. That's okay. Just be honest with where you are and where they are. And as I say here a lot, you can evaluate, you can take data. Do I share meals with them? Right? Where is his chewing at this point? What types of food and textures and tastes am I offering? Have I been a good role model? Can I up my game here? What are our eating routines around meals and snacks? You can change all of that. And in the last episode, I think it was number 91, I talk a lot about setting up routines and daily structure. And you can always step back and say, okay, let's clean this up. Let's reevaluate. It's sort of like looking in your messy closet and you say, okay, how do I How do I purge this? How do I organize it? You take it all out. You keep what's important. You throw away or give away what's not, what no longer serves you. And then you establish a new place, a new system in your closet. And that's what you can do around meal times. So no matter where you are on this continuum, be open to being honest and helpful and say, hey, I got this. I can change this. So thanks again for your time. I know it's precious. And we'll continue talking about healthy growth and development around speech and talking and play skills. And down in the show notes, I'll have the various links that you can find the books that I reference, find some chew toys that I really, really like. And also don't be shy. If you have specific questions, email me or DM me. I love to help brainstorm and figure out what can you do differently to really close the gaps. All right. God bless. Take care.